You know, by the way, I've known Rob for 20 years or so, and he's New York's Tom Waits, isn't he? Love him.
All right.
Hey, anyway, those who don't know me, I'm Roger Hitz. I'm a writer for NBC, and I also write celebrity articles for those magazines at Grace Finder grocery store checkout lines throughout the US of A. I also write articles on music and nightlife for a variety of publications in New York and beyond. This is something I wrote for a Cleveland, Ohio-based national magazine a couple years ago. It's kind of reminiscent about, as Ronnie said, friends, sports, the role music played in our lives, and gaining kind of a perspective on the whole thing. So here it goes. Have you heard Bloody? I asked my friend Tom with a knowing wink. We were riding on a bus packed with the altar boys from St. Michael's Catholic Church in Maple Grove, Michigan, on our way to the church's annual baseball outing at Tiger Stadium, going to watch what ended up being a good drubbing of the Tigers by the formidable Steve Dunning and the Cleveland Indians. No, Tom said. Who's it by? Well, I answered Deep Purple. Now, we had set up a scheme. There was no song Bloody by Deep Purple. But that day on the church trip, then on the bus each day for a week thereafter, each one of us in on the scheme, one by one, claimed to have heard Bloody. Best fucking song ever. Richie Blackmore really outdid himself this time, we would chirp. And each day our friend Toilet Taylor would glumly say he hadn't heard it yet. Now, you all know one. Toilet Taylor was that inevitable sad sack outsider who tried to gain the hipster inner circle. He was the one who wanted so hard to fit in that he would go to any length to be cool, to be part of the group, so we knew our plan would work. Now, you have to understand that in 1974, we were junior high musical zealots, and we regarded music much as the way we regarded sports. Each week in a 4-ring binder, we would all vote and rank each group in terms of who was the best. Even more absurdly, we kept a top 10 list of the best guitarist, bassist, keyboardist, drummer, pretty much based on who played the fastest and with the most intricacy. When one of us would buy an album we'd never heard before, say Derek and the Dominoes, Layla and Other Love Songs, we would chirp up, "Did you hear Clapton on that record? He's going up to number 3 on the list this week. I gotta move Elvin Lee down a notch." You know, we were basically rock and roll bobos who talked about musician talent in the same manner we would talk about the trade that brought Rusty Torres and Charlie Spikes over to the Tigers. Sports and rock were kind of the same thing to us. Still, you know, looking back, there was something incredibly organic about it all. We weren't city kids, we weren't even suburban kids. We were so rural that they had to bus us 12 miles to the nearest town with a school, and even that town didn't have so much as a traffic light. Garage rock, we did it one better. We had barn rock. Now, my older brother was a bassist in a mainly covers band called Rapture, not the current New York Art Rockers, of course. When they weren't playing the local Elks Lodge, treating old-timers to their versions of the latest from Robin Trower, Uriah Heep, and Black Oak, Arkansas, they practiced in an old barn on our 80-acre farm. And when they weren't practicing, my friends and I would take on the considerable task of taking apart my stereo system, trucking it out to the bar, and then playing records while we strapped on Rapture's equipment and mock-rocked ourselves into the point of ecstasy. We were particularly adept at Got This Thing on the Move by Grand Funk Railroad, since they were hometown heroes and all. Now, my brother eventually did an 8-year stint in Question Mark the Mysterians, so I guess he graduated from barn rock to garage rock. Now, as I said, we lived in the middle of nowhere, and our fragile egg-shell minds, as Jim Morrison would say, were incredibly influenced by the creams, rock scenes, hit paraders that arrived in our mailbox. By 1974, these magazines gave us considerable space to the burgeoning glam scene, and we were taken in hook, line, and sinker. Soon, all my friends, we owned the Dolls albums, bought Mott the Hoople, and ventured in the brave new world of Iggy's Raw Power. Now, these bands and their musicians rarely graced our top 10 musicians lists. After all, we weren't stupid. Johnny Thunders had no business being on a list with Jimmy Page. unless it was a battle for drug intake. But, you know, these bands that were short on musical talent but long on attitude and fresh songwriting coexisted peacefully with the Blue Oyster Cults and Rushes that we also idolized. You know, glam died a short and somewhat painful death, and by the time we were ready to graduate in 1978, disco ruled the airwaves and punk ruled the underground. We rejected both camps. Disco, well, for the usual teen homophobic reasons, and punk rock had all the awful musicianship of glam rock, but none of the joy. Trouble was, by this time, big old dinosaur rock was getting pretty crappy too. You know, Homer Simpson was probably right when he said rock achieved perfection in 1974. By 1978, we were left with the likes of Journey, Styx, REO Speedwagon, and you know, newer bands like Van Halen were just a little too ironic for our taste. But by college, we were breathing the fumes of the tailpipe of punk rock, and we embraced wholeheartedly that newfangled major record label-inspired concoction called New Wave. Now, the music gets a bad rap, and rightfully so in many cases when you think of Cars and the ilk, but New Wave to us also meant Ecstasy, Psychedelic Furs, Gang of Four. That might not fit the standard definition of what New Wave is now considered historically, but they were the post-punk world to us in 1982. I became editor of my college newspaper and immediately hired myself as chief record reviewer, mainly to score all the freebies the labels were sending to our campus, because alternative rock, back then called college rock, was burgeoning, and those greedy labels saw gold in them, their hills of college kids. You know, we made missteps along the way. I remember my friend Tom and I heading 150 miles south to Detroit to catch the coolest of new bands, Big Country. They were a band with a set list so pitifully short they played their eponymous hit twice in 1 hour. Now, we raved about them in the school paper, but Big Country ran out of gas before they'd even filled up their tank. And once I assigned a friend to review the Alarm's first album, and he raved that they were like the Clash except for more intelligent politics. Go figure. Now, it took years of growing out of our musical short pants before we went back and caught up with what we had really missed right under our nose all along growing up in Michigan, MC5, the Sonic Rendezvous Band. And turning into a writer and interviewing the likes of John Sinclair helped fill some of the gaps for me. But we would travel to Bookies in Detroit, the Agora in Cleveland, the Aragon in Chicago, to catch the bands that made us whole. Ramones, Husker Du, Black Flag, and the like. You know, by that time, we had completely disowned the hard rock of our youth. We were much too fucking cool to be caught dead listening to 10 years after. Anyway, back to the story I started. After a week on the school bus, and each one of us talking in increasingly breathless tones of the masterwork that was Bloody, Toilet Taylor hops on the bus one day with a very satisfied Cheshire grin on his face. He produced a cassette tape, goes, "Can you guess what I have here? Bloody!" It was our time to pounce. Toilet, there never was a Bloody. We just made it up. Now, Toilet turned beet red, he sunk in his seat, and he would make some half-hearted attempts to join our conversation, but he knew it was no use. He had been had, but good, and demonstrated his uncoolness once and for all to all the world as he knew it then. Now, looking back, I still feel like total shit for doing that to Toilet. And not just for the psychiatric bills, endless dime bags, toothless hookers that he must have encountered later on in his life. But, you know, after I've lived in New York City now for 22 years, and I put up with more than enough hipper than thous who only listen to the freshest, latest tracks. If it didn't come out in the last 48 hours, it isn't worth a damn. Now, the exclusionary politics of the reigning dance scene in New York can be laughable to the extreme. And I can't tell you how often I felt like piping up when I get into a conversation with your trash DJ. Yeah, but have you heard Bloody? Now, you know, life was simpler when Cream Magazine told us what to do and Lester Bangs was our god. And to this day, damn it, I still think you can keep a place in your musical heart for Steppenwolf right alongside Stereolab. Again.